A very good afternoon. In the last session of this faculty development program, I suppose that I'll be able to do a little justice to the topic given to me, that converting research into a meaningful publication. I added the word meaningful publication means it is just not adding into the literature but having meaningful publication which can be used by the science of dentistry for future use. Normally, what are the sources for knowledge sharing for us are either a newsletter, the journals which we are reading every day. And nowadays we have a lot of web-based learning mechanisms, and then we have some social media forums. And I want to mention here that social media forums are not only the ones on which you go and study, but these days there are some certain social media, forced one like Facebook and WhatsApp. We call it a university nowadays. So there are some forced media also for your knowledge, but they may or may not have correct technical knowledge at all the times. Now, when we talk of a publishing an article or a research out of our work, then why should we publish? One common thing is publish or perish. Publish or perish means you get a progress, you get some recognition out of this. But also it is equally important that you communicate to the world what you are working upon. And the most important thing is help the science grow, the science in which you are working, that science should be growing. You also contribute to the growth of your subject, the subject in which you are interested, the subject in which you want the world to know that you are doing. Then you sometimes work only for the purpose of institutional repute. We all know that people around us, they have been pressurizing us that yes, our college should stand first or second or whatever level. And nowadays we have rankings also, which brings about some pressure on us to publish our articles. And then finally, professional and personal gains is also a requirement. Now comes where to tell your story or where to publish your article. Then you have to see where you want to publish. Is the manuscript is in basic science or clinical, or it is a general nature, or is very specific? Based on that, you have to choose your journal. And whenever you have done a good research, probably you should aim for the highest possible journal. But at the same time, you have to balance between the top quality journals and the need for rapid publication, because most of the more reputed journals will have a long waiting list and your topic may get published after 2 years. So you have to balance between the two. You have to be very, very careful about the instructions to authors and ensure that your research, what you have done, is ensuring the requirement for that journal. Please look at the recent issues of the journal and make sure that you understand that journal style and write your manuscript accordingly. Consult your peers and mentors for advice before sending a journal. It helps you in making your articles better. And please be careful about the new journals. Will they survive, or sometimes there are journals which are predatory in nature. So today's topic, we are not covering predatory, but yes, it is very important for all of you to know. Now coming back to the main title, writing a manuscript. So I'll be dividing my topic into subcomponents of manuscript writing, and accordingly we'll go it as an story. So first thing in a manuscript is title, abstract and keywords, and these three are basic hallmark for success of a publication. Although the whole article is important, but these three contribute almost 50% of the chances of the successful of your article. Why? Because most electronic search engines, databases or journal websites will use the words found in your title and abstract and your list of keywords, and based on that they will choose, or the other people will cite your article. The title and abstracts are often the only parts of the paper which are freely available online. So that brings interest of the readers, and then they open your article and see. And then abstract being the first section of your paper, it is read by the journal editors and reviewers first. And based on that, majority of the times the decision are already taken, or many times they already make up a mind soon after reading the abstract, and then they start narrating their decision on your article. So why writing a title in a proper way is important is it is also used for categorization of your manuscript in a journal to get the attention of the readers. It summarizes the contents of the manuscript, it highlights the core content of the research and make your research stand out. And how to write an effective title for your manuscript is first you try to frame a sentence in which you write what did you do, how did you do your research, in whom you did do this research, and what did you find in that research. So if you summarize all those in one sentence, let's take an example and try to understand. It is one of my research that I compared and evaluated the efficacy of diode laser and simvastatin gel as a novel medicament in the pulpotomy of 100 primary molars. It was a randomized control trial. The teeth were allocated to any of the test groups by computer generated random sampling method, and I found that both the test modalities were equally efficacious clinically and radiographically at 12 months follow-ups. So in this I have highlighted few of the words, and if we arrange these few words and string them together, then these words are coming compared, evaluated, diode laser, simvastatin gel, pulpotomy, primary molars, randomized control trial and using random sampling, and equally efficacious. So when you rearrange these words and omit unwanted words, you make a very good title like. So for my article which was published in way back in 2015, this was the title, Comparative Evaluation of Diode Laser and Simvastatin Gel in Pulpotomy of Primary Molars, semicolon, a single blind randomized clinical trial. So this is in a nutshell giving the complete message what was done. Now it does not result into a, it does not give indication about the results. So maybe you may say that it may be one of the best methods, but yes, there could be more improvements which could be done to that title. Some important points for your title to note are: a long title can be split up into title with the subtitle like I use the colon. Avoid jargons and abbreviations in your title in science that is not recognized very much. Avoid common introductory phrases like the use of or a study of, that just increases the length of your title. Uh, but you can use some liberties while writing a letter to editor, commentaries or editorials. Normally most of the journals they would go with 80 characters or they would write 12 to 15 words for a journal title, sorry, the manuscript title. Now we come to the keywords. Why the journals ask for keywords? Because they help the indexers and search engines to find relevant papers. They help in getting more readership and help in getting you more citations. The keywords are mostly coming from index medicus, it is called as MASH terms. These used to be earlier printed and discontinued the printed version in 2007. They all are now available online. They are included as a part of Medline or PubMed article databases. It's given by US National Library of Medicine. And ideally your keyword should match the keywords which are given in MASH. Most of the journal ask between 7 to 10 keywords. Sometimes keyword may not be the only one word, it can be short phrase like dental and caries can be together, but yes, it is important. Now coming to an abstract. Abstract is basically as per the dictionary, it is a brief written statement of the main points or facts in a longer report, but in case of research it can be called as a concise selective summary of the entire contents of the study, and according to me it is a mirror of your research. So if you do not give a good reflection, then you are less chances of publication and less chances of getting readership. So what do we need in a good abstract? It is usually the first part that is read by not only the readers, but the editors, and as I mentioned, editors and reviewers mostly decide first based on your abstract. And with the advent of online abstracting services and online journals, it has become much important to have a good abstract. Your abstract should highlight the research, and many times your abstract is used for presentations and posters in the conference. So it is important from all sides. And what should be the qualities of a good abstract is it should give the relevant information, it should convey the key elements, it should be clear and concise, should be well structured, and should follow chronologically of the events in the manuscript per se. And we also have a literature available in which it has been reported that some of the journals, those who were earlier not using structured abstracts but now using structured abstracts, they have got significant better scores of the citation for their journals. Now, how my abstract would be? So, my abstract would be after reading the instructions to the author carefully, it will follow the emerald pattern. It should define all abbreviations, acronyms, and symbols. It should highlight the key points with the specific and quantitative sentences. Should use the active voice preferably, and it should be keeping the introduction background as the shortest with only the gaps in the research presented. The methodology should be elaborated, that it should cover at least randomization, the sample used, number of cases versus controls, intervention, the duration of the study, primary and secondary outcomes, and if there was a blinding, it should be covered. Results should be little details and clearly mentioning odds ratio, relative risk, and p values. Discussion is not required in an abstract, and the conclusion should be not more than 2 to 3 lines with a primary take home message. And most importantly, the concluding line should verbatim answer the question raised in the objective. If it is there, the chances of your abstract to be used further increases. Now coming to introduction methodology. As I mentioned earlier, emerald structure is introduction, methodology, results, discussion, and conclusion, and the same sequence I will be presenting you the rest of my presentation. So, when we talk of a publication, it is kind of my story. And if I say it is my story, then your narrative for the introduction should cover here is a problem, then I should narrate that it's an interesting problem. And then I should also mention at the end that it is an unsolved problem. And based on that, my objectives are formed. So, why the study is done has to be covered in the introduction. So, you introduce the subject, provide the context of the study, and then you encourage those who are interested in the field to read the entire paper by giving few important findings. The introduction normally follows basic flow from general to specific. It moves through the 3 phases. First, establishing a territory. What is the field of work, why this is important, and what has already been done in this area. Then second is establishing the niche, that it indicates a gap, raise a question, challenge the prior work in this territory, and then occupy the niche is outline the purpose and announce the present research, what is going to be done in this research. The general rules for introduction are each paragraph should contain one idea. First sentence should introduce that idea. Last sentence should be a concluding statement about that idea. Then support important statements with appropriate references. Specialized term used should be clarified very much in the introduction, and acronyms or abbreviations should be provided. The points to be covered in introduction are importance and magnitude of a particular problem, its frequency, prevalence, disease burden, etc., the lacunae in the existing literature, the hypothesis which is underlying the study, and aims of the study. As a thumb rule, the difference between introduction of an article versus introduction of a thesis is it the introduction for an article should not exceed 1 to 2 pages of double spaced A4 size paper. It means almost 20 to 24 lines, not more than that. Should be written in a present tense. It needs to convey why the authors chose the particular subject, and if the authors have done any related work in past, it should also be mentioned in the introduction. Now coming to the next is methods. Methods is actually a part, here is my idea of solving that problem in case of my study. So the contents of methodology is what was done, how it was done, how the data was collected and analyzed, and did the researcher have ethical clearance or consent of the study subjects. So, these should be the main contents, but at the same time we have to remember that it should be detailed enough that the reader should be able to reproduce the same results if the another person uses the same methodology, and users should be able to judge the results that it has been done genuinely. So, adequate details are required for that particular purpose. The organization of the method section is: first you write about the study design, then you write about ethical considerations, then you come back to the main methods, and in the last you cover the statistical analysis. Most of the times we have now reporting guidelines for all types of studies. Like for randomized control trials, we have concert, observational studies, we have strobe, systemic reviews, we have prisma, case reports, we have care. And nowadays our colleagues in endodontics, they have come up specific guidelines for care for endodontic studies. My own department, we also have come up with certain guidelines which are on some of the case reports, as well as on the uh, on the computer methods of simulation. So there are guidelines available nowadays, and if we follow these guidelines, more chances of getting the success of your publication. Now, what should be included in the method section? The study design, as I mentioned earlier, the characteristics of the sample population, the sample size calculation, how you did, the sample selection or the sampling strategy, how did you include or exclude, randomization in details, how it was done. First is the sample size calculation, sample selection, and then the randomization. Then in details the procedure undertaken, it can be also include the preparation of material or the clinical work or details of the interventions. However, for certain standard things like making a 2% solution, you may not need to give in details that 200 milligram was dissolved into this many ml of water, like that. You may not write, you can directly write 2% solution of so and so salt was used. So, standards may be omitted just to avoid the words, the number of words. Then what was the measured and how it was measured? It is important that not only writing that we measured the blood pressure, but we should also write the using so and so type of sphygmomanometer. Then if there were any special consideration that should be mentioned, how did you reduce the risk of bias to be covered in adequate details? If there were any adverse events or was there contingency management required, you have to add it. It may not be adding to the final results or your conclusions, but it is important to mention, because the similar thing may be faced by anybody else who is trying to replicate the same kind of experiment. And it is important that people understand that you have genuinely done this work. Like when we report the loss to follow up. So this is normal and natural in a clinical situation, that it is very, very unlikely that you will have 100% of the people coming back to you for a follow up at the prescribed date and time. It is human nature. We cannot be well at all the days. We cannot be present on all the days. We cannot be punctual on all the days. So it is important to mention even that. Then method of recording the data, whether you use Performa or you directly entered into computer, that also gives a message about likelihood of mistakes or likelihood of problems while collecting the data. Then certain times repetitions are required, that should be mentioned. Repetitions means for the purpose of calibration. Then statistical analysis details to be provided in the methodology, not only writing that the data was analyzed using so and so software, but actually we have to write that this and this data was compared using so and so method or so and so test, and the other data is compared using this non-parametric test or parametric test. And if you have derived any data, like if you have derived BMR out of the weight and height, that should also be mentioned in the methodology section. So when you complete the methodology, then your narrative comes for result and discussion. So result says that my idea works. How did I get when I worked on my idea? What results did I get? That has to be covered in the results. And the discussion here is how my idea compares to other people's approaches in my story. So I'll be covering both of them together. So the results, it is the function of the result section is to objectively present your key results without interpretation in an orderly and logical sequence using both text and illustrative materials. We see many times in our literature that people are only writing text, or sometimes they are only providing tables. That is not correct. It has to have all three components. The result section always begins with the text, reporting the key results and referring to your figures and tables as you proceed. It means text is your main, figures and tables are supportive to it, although they are also equally important. So, three components of results, all three are very, very important. The flow of results should go with first presenting what are the study subjects and what are the groups, then what was the flow chart for the study subjects, how did you proceed to the next level, then results of various measurements, then the numerical data, and then finally the statistical aspects. Now there are many times there is a question that a person who is doing research is doing some experiment, and a picture of that researcher along with some lab equipment and all, that may not be required for in a scientific study. But if it is a very, very unique methodology or unique appliance, yes, then the picture is required. So please remember, it is contextual how many figures to be used and whether figures to be used in a manuscript or not. It is contextual, but yes, it is important that we should have some of the figures. Even presenting the numerical data in the form of chart or graph is very, very important for making it more readable, more understandable by the people. There are some rules about the results, that report your results naturally as you found them. Do not try to deviate at that point of time and try to say this number was low, this was high, or we could recruit only females as the females were representing more in this particular clinic. That is part of discussion. Here in the result part, you have to present it as naturally as you found them. Think carefully about where content is placed in the overall structure of your paper, and be sure to carefully address all the relevant results, not just statistically significant ones or the ones that support your hypothesis. So, you need to present everything which you mentioned in your methodology. Now coming to effective discussion. So, discussion is actually in your story you have to sell your idea. The discussion correlates with the results, but do not repeat the results, and it puts your results in a perspective with the previously published data. So, whatever data you have got in the results, now it is the time to critically evaluate yourself in the discussion part, and it is the discussion is not only important to cover the data, but also the methodology at some point of time. So, the essential difference between the results and discussion are the results normally answer the questions what, but the discussion answers the question so what. The results describe the experiments completed before the paper was written, but the discussion summarizes and interprets the significance of the main findings of the study. The results state the results without interpretation. The discussion interprets the results without restating them. The results use simple past tense, where the discussion uses both past and present tense. The results normally comprise of textual elements, tables and figures, but the discussion is text mainly. Now the components of the discussion are: it should give the summary of the main results, it should compare results to the earlier studies, should present how strong is this particular study or this particular results, how convincingly the question has been answered, the strength of the study, the limitations of the study, the generalizability of the data of the study, although sometimes people call it as a part of limitations, but yes, it is important to mention the clinical implications of the study. And then the last part of discussion is conclusion. So, by the word clinical implication, I mean that even if there was a difference in Newtons which was uh, statistically significantly different, but actually in practice for chewing purpose that much difference of Newton may not have any effect on day to day values, then it should be mentioned. So that is very very important that we talk about clinical implications. And lastly, in the conclusion also. So the flow is the study's major findings are first presented, then in context to the current research, and finally you close with the help of the discussion. The discussion finishes with a concise 3 to 5 sentence concluding paragraph. This is not just a reinstatement of your results, rather it is comprised of some final summative statements that reflect the flow and outcomes of the entire paper, and it does not include speculative statements or additional materials in the discussion. Now comes to the most important thing is conclusion. Conclusion is like magnifying the results which you have got are present in a magnified way. So magnified way means what are your major findings and what are the significance or implications of your results that are presented in the conclusion. The conclusion section state the most important outcome of your work. Do not simply summarize the points already made in the body. Instead, interpret your findings at a higher level of abstraction. Show whether or to what extent you have succeeded in addressing the need stated in the introduction. Here I mean to say again, answering the questions raised in the introduction is the main objective of the conclusion. Few more points of the about the conclusion is that the conclusion presents the last word on the issues you raised in your paper. Just as the introduction gives the first impression to your reader, the conclusion offers a chance to leave a lasting impression. Do this, for example, by highlighting key points of your analysis of your findings. Summarize your thoughts and convey the larger implications of your study. Demonstrate the importance of your ideas and introduce the possible new and expanded ways of thinking about the research problem. So, most of the times in our thesis, when we write the conclusion, we always write that uh, a little longer term follow up to be done with a little larger size of sample, like that. So, that may not be required at all the time. Rather, it may be required to written more scientific words which explains or the expands the area, the horizon in which you have already done a little work. Thank you very much.